You learned to read the room before you could read a book. You became fluent in your mother's silences. You could predict your father's mood by the weight of his footsteps on the stairs. While other children were building forts and losing themselves in play, you were building safety, monitoring, managing, mothering. You became the emotional architect of your own home, the peacekeeper, the translator, the one who held it all together when the adults couldn't. And somewhere along the way, without ceremony or acknowledgement, your childhood ended. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in 1,000 small moments where you swallowed your needs, dimmed your light, and became smaller so that others could be bigger. You learned that your value wasn't in being a child, curious, messy, dependent, but in being useful, reliable, mature beyond your years. They called it being an old soul. They praised you for it. But here's what no one tells you about becoming the parent to your own parent. The thing that once kept your family from falling apart is now the thing quietly suffocating your life. Because you didn't just learn to be helpful, you learned that your worth is conditional upon your utility, that rest is a luxury you haven't earned, that your needs are a burden, that love is something you must constantly earn through service, through silence, through the erasure of your own inner world. You saved your family, but in doing so, you lost yourself. And now, decades later, you're an adult who can't stop performing, can't stop anticipating, can't stop believing that if you just do enough, give enough, disappear enough, you'll finally be safe, you'll finally be loved, you'll finally be allowed to rest. But the rest never comes because the child who learned that survival meant caretaking is now an adult who doesn't know how to exist without a crisis to solve or someone else's pain to absorb. This is the psychology of the parentified child. And if this resonates, if you feel it in your chest like a weight you've carried so long you forgot it wasn't yours, stay with me, because understanding this wound is the first step toward reclaiming what was taken from you.
Parentification is the process by which a child is placed in the role of meeting their parents' emotional, psychological, or practical needs, reversing the natural order of care. Imagine a tree forced to grow roots upward and branches downward. It survives, it adapts, but it never grows the way it was designed to. This is parentification, a developmental inversion that reshapes everything: your nervous system, your identity, your blueprint for love. There are two forms. Instrumental parentification is tangible: cooking, cleaning, caring for siblings, managing household finances. You became the third parent before you hit puberty. Emotional parentification is invisible, but far more corrosive. You became your parents' confidant, their therapist, their emotional regulator. You absorbed their anxiety, mediated their conflicts, and learned that your emotional needs were secondary or non-existent. In psychology, this is understood through the lens of role confusion. Developmental psychologist Salvatore Minuchin described it as a boundary dissolution within family systems, where the child becomes a surrogate spouse or parent, sacrificing their developmental trajectory to stabilize a destabilized system. What happens neurologically is profound. Your brain begins to develop what trauma researchers call hypervigilance, a state of chronic threat detection. The amygdala, your brain's alarm system, becomes overactive. You're constantly scanning for danger, shifts in tone, micro-expressions, the emotional weather of every room you enter. This isn't anxiety. This is a survival skill that calcified into your personality. At the same time, your nervous system gets stuck in what's known as sympathetic dominance, a state of perpetual activation. Rest feels dangerous. Stillness feels irresponsible. Because when you were young, letting your guard down meant chaos. It meant someone would fall apart. So you learned to stay awake, stay alert, stay useful. And then there's the attachment wound. The research of John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth reveal how early caregiving shapes our relational templates. Parentified children often develop what's called anxious avoidant attachment, a confusing pattern where you desperately crave closeness but can't tolerate vulnerability. You learned that dependence is dangerous, that asking for help is weakness. So you become an adult who gives endlessly but can never receive. This also creates what schema therapy calls an unrelenting standard schema, the internalized belief that you must be perfect, competent, and self-sufficient at all times, or you are fundamentally unworthy. You became a human doing, not a human being. Here's the cruelest part. Parentification often happens in families where the parents aren't villains. They might have been depressed, overwhelmed, or dealing with their own unhealed trauma. The wound isn't always malicious, but intention doesn't erase impact. And the child who had to grow up too fast is now an adult who doesn't know how to be held, how to be soft, how to just be.
The cost of premature adulthood is the loss of the self you were never allowed to become. Carl Jung once wrote, "The debt we owe to the unlived life is the heaviest burden we carry." For the parentified child, this rings with devastating clarity. Because you didn't just lose your childhood, you lost the possibility of who you might have been if you'd been allowed to be messy, to need, to fail, to be protected. You sacrificed your authenticity for acceptance. And the cruelest irony? You were never truly accepted. You were needed. There's a difference. This is the invisible grief of parentification, mourning a childhood you can barely remember losing because you were too busy surviving it. The core fear that governs your life now is this: if I am not useful, I will be abandoned. This fear doesn't announce itself. It hides in the small moments. It's the reason you say yes when you mean no. It's why you can't delegate, can't trust others to follow through, can't let anyone see you struggling. It's why intimacy feels like exposure, why success feels hollow, why rest feels like failure. You become an adult who overfunctions in every relationship, romantic, professional, platonic. You're the one who remembers everyone's birthdays, who organizes the group trip, who offers advice before it's asked for. You're the emotional laborer, the invisible glue. And when people don't reciprocate, when they take without giving, it confirms your deepest fear. I am only valuable when I am serving. Philosopher Simone Weil spoke of affliction, which a suffering so total that it removes the sufferer's ability to even articulate their pain. Parentification is a form of affliction. Because how do you explain that you're grieving something that looks, from the outside, like love? How do you say, I wasn't abused, but I was used, without feeling like you're betraying the people who needed you? You can't. So you stay silent. You perform competence. You become the person everyone can rely on. And beneath it all, there's a child still waiting for permission to rest, still waiting for someone to say, "You don't have to earn your place here. You are enough, just as you are." But no one says it. So you keep giving, keep proving, keep running from the terror that if you stop, you will discover that you are nothing without your utility. This is the philosophical weight of parentification, the belief that your existence is conditional, that love is transactional, that you are not a person, you are a function.
So, what does this look like when the parentified child becomes an adult? You might find yourself in relationships where you are the forever therapist, the emotional manager, the one who gives and gives until you're empty and then feels guilty for feeling empty. You attract partners who are emotionally unavailable because unavailability feels familiar. It feels like home. You don't know how to be with someone who wants to take care of you because being cared for feels suffocating, obligating, dangerous. So you choose people who need you more than they see you, and you call it love. You might have a career that everyone admires, but internally, you feel like a fraud. You overprepare, overdeliver, and overextend because anything less feels like proof of your inadequacy. You can't delegate because you don't trust anyone to do it right. You burn out repeatedly, but instead of resting, you find new ways to prove your worth. Success doesn't bring relief, it brings more pressure. Because the goal was never achievement. The goal was safety. And you learned long ago that safety doesn't exist. You might struggle with boundaries in ways that confuse even you. You say yes when you mean no. You give advice when people just want to vent. You take on other people's emotions as if they're your responsibility to fix. And when someone gets upset with you, it's not just conflict, it's a threat to your existence. Because in your family, your job was to keep the peace. So now any tension feels like failure. Any disagreement feels like abandonment. You might have a complicated relationship with your own needs. You can identify what everyone else wants, needs, fears, but when someone asks you what you want, silence, blankness, because you were never allowed to want. Wanting was selfish, needing was weak. So you learn to disappear your desires so thoroughly that now as an adult, you don't even know what they are. You are fluent in everyone's language but your own. You might experience chronic guilt, even when you've done nothing wrong. Guilt for resting, guilt for saying no, guilt for not fixing someone else's problem. This guilt isn't rational, it's a residue of the belief that your worth is tied to your ability to manage other people's pain. So when you're not in crisis mode, when you're not solving or saving, there's this low grade of anxiety. Am I doing enough? Am I being enough? You might also feel a deep, unnamed exhaustion that sleep doesn't fix. This is the exhaustion of a nervous system that never learned to turn off, of a mind that's been catastrophizing since childhood, of a body that's been braced for impact for so long that relaxation feels like a foreign language. You're tired not just because you do too much, but because you exist in a state of perpetual vigilance. Here's what's important to understand. These aren't personality flaws. These are adaptations. They are evidence of your resilience, not your brokenness. The unlearning process begins with witnessing, not fixing, not judging, just seeing. Seeing the child you were, the one who had no choice but to grow up fast, the one who saved everyone but couldn't save themselves. And then slowly learning to ask the questions you were never allowed to ask. What do I need? What do I want? What would it feel like to let someone else hold this?
The work isn't about becoming someone new. It's about returning to the person you were before you learned that your needs were too much, before you learned that rest was irresponsible, before you learned that love was something you had to earn. So how do you heal from something that shaped you so fundamentally? First, you have to grieve. Grieve the childhood you didn't get. Grieve the parents who couldn't show up the way you needed. Grieve the version of yourself who believed that if you were just helpful enough, responsible enough, invisible enough, you'd finally be safe. This grief isn't dramatic. It doesn't look like a breakdown. It's quiet. It's in the moments when you catch yourself over-functioning and pause. When you say no and survive the guilt. When you let someone else plan the dinner, organize the event, hold the weight, and you don't step in to fix it. Second, you have to practice reparenting your inner child. This means learning to give yourself what you never received. Permission to need, to want, to rest without justification. It means speaking to the child inside you with the tenderness and protection they deserved then and deserve now. This might look like setting a boundary and not explaining it, like asking for help without apologizing, like letting yourself be bad at something, like choosing softness over competence, rest over productivity, being over doing. Third, you have to engage in nervous system regulation. Your body is still operating as if it's in danger, so you teach it safety through breath work, through somatic therapy, through intentional, embodied rest. You show your body again and again that it's okay to let go, that chaos won't come if you stop bracing for it. Fourth, you work with shadow integration, a Jungian concept. You acknowledge the parts of yourself you've rejected, the part that's angry at your parents, the part that resents the people you've cared for, the part that wants to be selfish, messy, irresponsible. You stop performing goodness and start living honestly. And finally, you redefine what it means to be loved. Love is not transactional. Love is not earned through service. Love is not conditional upon your ability to disappear your needs. Real love sees you, holds you, and doesn't ask you to shrink. The poet Rainer Maria Rilke once wrote, "Perhaps all the dragons in our lives are princesses who were only waiting to see us act, just once, with beauty and courage." The dragon isn't your past, it's the belief that you were only worthy when you were useful. And the beauty and courage? It's choosing over and over to exist as a person, not a function. Healing doesn't mean you'll never overgive again. It doesn't mean you'll stop being empathetic, responsible, or caring. It means you'll do those things from a place of choice, not compulsion, from wholeness, not woundedness. The goal is not to be fixed. The goal is to become whole. And wholeness includes the child you were, the adult you've become, and the person you're learning to be, the one who knows they are worthy of care, rest, and love simply because they exist. If this resonated with you, you're not alone. Millions of people carry this wound. And the fact that you're here, watching this, learning this, it means you're already doing the work. You're already breaking the cycle. If you found value in this, consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you want to continue exploring the psychology of the patterns that shape us, subscribe. Let's keep unlearning together. You were never too much. You were just never given enough. And now You get to give that to yourself.